أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome to this video on sociopathy and self-destructive behavior. I happen to be an expert on this for many reasons, but let's dive in. A simple definition of sociopathy, just to begin, is someone whose only way of relating to other people is to discover and foster codependence. I used to offer this definition as uh, a simple definition of a sociopath as someone who whose only way of relating to others is to foster codependence. But this aspect of them discovering the codependence first is actually very, very important because every single person on earth, um, unless they're raised by angels and have some sort of miraculous birth, tend to be wounded when they're very, very young, and that wound becomes a core of their personality. So everyone has that codependence, everyone has that attachment to something. And if you do happen to be a spiritual person and a religious person, like a genuinely religious person, who has a strong, especially in a biblical sense, if you have like a strong sense of worshiping God and only depending on Him and only being attached to Him, there is a way people can transmute this through spiritual practice and religious practice. And fortunately, I grew up with that, right? So, despite having a very healthy relationship to my codependence and having a lot of self awareness and, awareness of my attachment style intuitively and through observation, and knowing that I was taking after my mom, my personality wise, and having my mom as a model to kind of watch and see what goes on with her, and observing her in that way from a young age, um, I was very aware of all this, but you'll see how that doesn't help with sociopaths often. So let me say this again. A sociopath is someone who discovers your codependencies and then fosters them, deepens them, makes them worse. And the reason that I like saying this simple definition is that to make a legal case the way we're intending to do this on this channel and with this organization, Victims of Sociopathy United for Justice, right? We need to have a simple definition because to make ourselves heard in court, we need to have a definition which utilizes efficient language to convey both the absolute devastation that a sociopath can have on the course of someone's life, and on their life circumstances, and how that devastation is utterly the responsibility of the sociopath. Even if I'm a codependent person, there's a healthy way to be codependent. You can't help the structure of your psyche. So if you're self-aware and you have a healthy relationship with your own personality style and things of that sort, a sociopath will come along and foster the unhealthy aspects of that in a way that is literally them. Someone is wounded, someone is like weak, someone is on the street bleeding to death, and you kick them in the head, right? It's like it's literally, they attack you where you're weakest, and so the burden of responsibility of moral, ethical, and legal responsibility should lie on them, not the person, because it's human to have those weaknesses, and it's human not to anticipate that someone is going to be someone who looks like you, like a human being, will actually be a predator, a vampire who's seeking to enslave you basically through your psychological weaknesses, right? We're not all James Bond. We're not all trained in Jedi mind tricks and defending our mental space and mind sciences and all this type of stuff. I've actually had 3 years of Jedi training in that sense, and that's what's helped me articulate all this in the way I have. So we need this efficient language to convey both the perfect devastation delivered by a sociopath and the other responsibility they have for that devastation. Um, this is like the key for us getting justice, is we need that simple definition. We need to be able to fire it off. We need to be able to show very clearly, very easily, very quickly, and very motivationally what we're talking about in a way that people can compassionately relate to our victimhood. Next is fostering codependence rooted in wounding is meta manipulation. So there's something like where I walk up to you, I'm a stranger, you have some moderate level of trust for me because I'm dressed kind of like I'm dressed well, I have a nice cardigan from Banana Republic and have nice jeans and nice shoes, and maybe I smell nice. So there's all these cues you have to trust me to some degree. You're still not gonna like completely open yourself to me, but you're gonna have some level of trust, right? Um, so if I come up to you with that level of trust, even that is enough opening for a sociopath to slowly start the enslavement process by slowly fostering codependencies. Um, they'll make you feel good about yourself. They might flirt with you in the right way. They might see that you look hungry or you look like someone who can't like go out and eat all the time. So they'll have a fun conversation with you and immediately be like, you have to come eat with me. No, it's my treat. You have to. I enjoy your company so much, and they'll make you feel totally welcome, and like it's not a big deal for them to spend money on you, and there's no strings attached and you have to go with them. They're going to make you feel that way. Depending, that's just an example. If that's your situation, it depends on your situation. They're going to make you feel a certain way, like that really meets you, like that you really want to feel that way, right? For example, for me, it was, I come from a religious background. So for me, the only acceptable context for sexuality was marriage. And so from a young age, I knew I wanted to get married young. And Islam is like, it's very sex positive within marriage, right? So Islam's not supposed to be an extended celibacy religion. So like Christians have this sensibility that wait for the right one, even if it's into your 30s or 40s, and Muslims are like, no, just marry someone around you, and fulfill your needs. And there's a lot of love and affection, mammalian love and affection that rises just from at the right age being in a sexual relationship and developing in that. It doesn't mean that there'll never be a divorce between people who get married young. It just means like it's better to get married young. Just overall, it's just better. And you shouldn't be too choosy. Like whoever's around you, that's kind of the group you have to pick with. You can't like try to find the perfect person for the rest of your life. You just kind of look around. You need, sexuality is a need. You need a partner. So you're just kind of looking around at what's available, and then you pick someone, within what you consider to be your community. Um, but fostering codependence and ruining is minimum. So my whole thing that's kind of what I wanted. So my father always used that. First he's the one who set the religious context. As for him, it was a method of control. For me, it was like a general mode of knowing God and spirituality and stuff. And so he used that drive of mine to want to be married rather young to always keep me in this kind of promise that like it was coming soon. Like I'd finish high school and it would happen. I'd finish my first 2 years of college and it would happen. Or I'd finish this business and it would happen. And all this. And the later it got, like the later into my 20s it got, like even into my early 20s, because I was someone who wanted to get married in my mid-teens. And so it was going to my early 20s. It was already starting to be like kind of like a desperate drive in me, because obviously in my mind, there's that break on just like open sexuality. I was going to go do that because it's still not really in integrity with my value set and my way of thinking about the world. And so he would use that like promise, and you can imagine how intense the only way of sexual fulfillment, how much of a promise that can be, how motivating that can be. And so he would use that kind of codependence I had, that like my father's don't, because in Islam, like as a religion, your parents are the ones who are supposed to, that's the most honorable way, like they facilitate it for you. And I was raised with a sense of honor and raised with a sense that they would do that. But that's the codependence that my father kind of used against me. That's like the primary one. It all came back to the marriage thing. It all came back to, and I'm actually 32, and the manipulation lasted. I mean, I was very young when I fully kind of realized who my dad was, but still disentangling. I'm 32 now, and 32 in 4 months about, and I'm disentangled. Like, you know what I mean? I'm disentangled, and I have some financial resource, but I'm in a very like disadvantaged position for that still, you know. So you can imagine how devastating it is just to be in the position I'm in due to what my father's done. Um, Basically, this fostering of codependencies rooted in wounding is meta manipulation. Another way to say that, it's psychological enslavement. It's very coercive. It is psychological enslavement. There's no way out, really. That wounding, if I could snap my fingers and be a whole and healthy person without any psychological needs and, whatever, I would do that. But most people are not like that. And so it is psychological enslavement. It can be impossible to break out without specialized knowledge and training that most people don't have access to. Therefore, the bonds that keep these psychological slaves in bondage are as ironclad as any that physically restrained African people brought here to America on ships. And I know that's provocative, especially if you're black, but it's true. Like, I'm being that provocative on purpose. Like, ironclad, like the way you couldn't break out. People with certain psychological woundings and sociopaths who've observed and developed all these techniques like over years to manipulate that specific person and have years of experience and years of momentum actually keeping them as slaves, like psychologically, and their whole psyche is set up to enslave other people through fear and hope. Um, yeah, it can be ironclad. It can be iron, especially if you don't have the knowledge and the training to break out of it. It can really be ironclad. Next, a psyche that was already codependent was already prone to self-destructive behavior. So if you're codependent, everyone has their dependencies, everyone has a little bit of codependence, unless you're a sociopath, right? Unless you're a sociopath and literally don't feel the need for anyone, um, then you're a sociopath. But if you're a normal person, we all have codependencies. So a psyche that was already codependent was already prone to self-destructive behavior. So we all have that seed of self-destructive behavior. Um, you know, if its expectations are not met. So if there's like, if there's something that you expect, not something you want. We can all deal with not having what we want, but there's something that you expect, you know, and it's something good, right? Like you have some promises about your future and some sense of where you're going or what it would be like to be 32 or where you'd be by 32. And all of a sudden you're there and you're nowhere close to it and there's no way to get there, you know? So that can be devastating if your expectations aren't met, and that can drive you into self-destructive behavior. So with my dad, the thing would be like he would like one time, one of the contexts that he ended up breaking, he broke every context, but one of them was he promised me that I could go to Dow International Medical School in Pakistan, and one of my cousins was already going there, and I got in, and everything was good, and I was going to go, and it was my dad's idea, and my mom was super hyped about it because everyone in her family was a doctor, and she always wanted me to be one. But in college, I decided that's not what I wanted to do. I definitely wanted to do business, and I had bigger dreams, and I was very capable of doing something more non-traditional. But after 2 or 3 years of like suffering through my father breaking context, I was just like, I just want to be independent, like I don't care anymore. I just want to be independent. I want to get married. I want to get I don't want to waste my 20s. I want to get some of the basics out the way. Whatever route I take to the top of the mountain, like I don't care. I just need to get independent of my dad. And even that can be used against you. Like if that becomes your attachment, becoming unattached to your father, even that because for me that was represented in money and financial independence. And so earlier it was just about getting married and the sexual drive, and then when it really became about detaching from my dad, then he used the promise of financial independence for a while. And that's the thing about a sociopath. They're tracking you. They're a predator and they're tracking your psyche very closely. Um, yeah. So psyche that was already codependent was already prone to self-destructive behavior if its expectations are not met. But those codependencies are intentionally fostered. So with a sociopathic person like your dad or an uncle or aunts or whoever they are, they're not only going to know your codependencies and how to hit those buttons, they're actively, proactively fostering them in relationship to them. So you get into this cognitive behavioral habit and a hypnosis in relationship to them. Like when you see their face, there's all these expectations attached onto them, right? And it's because they're fostering it. That's what they foster. And so their way of manipulating isn't so much of like hitting buttons where they can do that, they're good at that, they can do that. But that hitting buttons is amplified by 1,000 because you have all these expectations of this person, and they know exactly what expectations you have because they're actively fostering them. And so it's like meta manipulation. They're deepening the codependency. And so you go into this hypnosis in relationship to them, and years and months and, decades can pass. And even when you're fighting out of it, you're so deep in it. Maybe you come up to here and then you fall back. Then you come up to here, then you fall back. Then you come back here and you fall back. Then and then boom, it's really difficult. You're fighting out of a hypnosis, basically, is what's happening. Um, but if those codependencies are intentionally fostered, as is the case with a sociopath, expectations are continuously broken, then complete self-destruction can eventually take over. So this does happen, like complete self-destruction. Those people are completely self-destructive, i.e., addicted to substances, addicted to alcohol, addicted to something, like really engaged in addictive behaviors. It's because they're total, like people who are really just gone. They're just annihilating, slow suicide, annihilating themselves. It's because their self-destructive behavior, like total self-destruction, has been hit. That button with all the nuclear bombs going off all over the world, like that button has just been hit, right? And that's what a sociopath is doing. Either they want you to be their slaves and be obedient and be broken in front of them. And if you're a strong person, a strong-willed person, and like absolutely willed, where like no matter what they do, your will won't be broken. Eventually, their target shifts from enslaving you to destroying your life, to destroying you. So, for example, with me, my father, once he started to really realize that he wasn't going to do what he did to my mom, he broke my mom. But once he realized he wasn't going to be able to do that with me, he it turned to like actually getting destroying my health, to actually destroying my health, and he never succeeded in that except for the last 2 years I spent at home. um, I developed allergies, and like I was literally locked in my room for 2 years, just in a deep state of confusion, like growing confusion, like just not knowing what to do anymore. And so there's definitely been, I was a creative genius my whole life, and now I'm at 32, and all of a sudden like I have some cognitive decline, like a little bit. It's hard to articulate as clearly, and like my eloquence isn't where it used to be. I'm not as creative. My brain can't go. It used to go for like weeks on end, like trying to create something, and now my brain, like if I'm like going at it, like if I have like a 7 paragraph masterpiece come out of me, like I'll be tired for a couple of days. You know what I mean? And that's not a lot of work. I can still produce art, but it just like that production of art has a huge toll on me. I'm exhausted. Um, Definitely have problems with recall, stuff of that sort. And also physically, I have breathing problems now. Like I always have like asthma issues. Like my sinuses are always stuffed, and I have like my smaller microtubules in my lungs are always like inflamed and tight. And it can become permanent. I'm trying to get help to get stem cell therapy and various things that can help early in the process, but it's pretty bad. If it keeps going on, like my lungs can uh, fibrosis and stuff can happen. So I'll ask for your prayers with that, and let's move on. Um, in this way, the sociopath induces total self destruction and a slow suicide in the person. So, literally, a sociopath will induce suicidal impulses. Like, it'll come to that point where the person who is codependent and doesn't really know about all this, with me, I've always been aware of it. I've always known it. My awareness and my knowledge has only increased. It's still impossible to disentangle, like, given our religious background and my Pakistani background and cultural stuff, and it's still always been very difficult to disentangle from my dad, despite being fully aware of what was going on. Um, so when you're aware of it, it's less likely that suicidal impulses will be successfully induced. But I'll tell you what, those 2 years where I was at home in a deeply confused state and growing confused. I wasn't confused when I got there, but over those 2 years before I hit, like I ejected, those 2 years, those suicidal impulses for the first time in my life, and it wasn't ever like I was going to act on them, but there really are impulses. Like you feel it. You like there's thoughts that just come up, and you see them. It's like a demon showing them to you because it's involuntary. You don't want to do that. You don't want to see those things. You don't want to feel that way, but it's like it takes you over. It's involuntary, those impulses, and I'm not someone who would ever do that, no matter what, under any circumstances. But it sucks having to experience that, like those impulses. It's really terrible having to experience that. It feels like a huge defeat coming to that point in your life that despite your will, you're involuntarily experiencing those things due to circumstances that you've been repeatedly put in by someone. Um, the next part is I personally experienced those suicidal urges for the first time in my life. For the last 2 years, I was at home. Despite having a very robust, creative, and enduring personality for all my life prior, despite the sociopathy of my father, so I've already talked about that, so I'll move on. The manifestation of self destructive behavior in my mother. So, gambling and spending all night roaming casinos and driving to other casino cities like Biloxi just to escape, distancing anyone who reminded her of who she really was and surrounding herself with people who actually reinforced the slavery. So basically, my mom was a highly codependent person, but her father was a very reliable. Her parents were very reliable, very loving, almost spoiled her. She was like a rich princess, basically. Got to go to medical school, be part of the political elite in Pakistan, and all this stuff. And, being codependent on parents who really take care of you is not a bad thing. I guess it can be because if, you get married to someone like my dad later in life, then you don't have any way out psychologically. So that's not great. But like if you're highly codependent on your daddy and your daddy's a good daddy, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's basically who my mom was, like a highly codependent woman who had like a good person to rely on, or, in her childhood, and then that got transferred onto my dad, and my dad was just a sociopath who used it against her. um and so like when her thing was, like when I was in high school, maybe a little bit earlier than that, maybe a little bit later, no, definitely not later, definitely earlier, she just needed an escape. So she would leave the house and she'd just be gone. And she, from that, the only place she could go, she was like a Pakistani woman who wore hijab and stuff. Where was she gonna go? Where was she gonna feel welcome? She wasn't gonna go to a bar. And I feel like it might have even been healthier. Like I had high school friends, and so I've hung out in bars before with friends, and I feel like it might have been healthier than going to casinos if she just had somewhere to go talk to people. 'Cause bars can be like that in the West sometimes. Not if she walked in wearing hijab or anything, but she used to do this thing that was kind of cute now in retrospect. She used to take off the hijab and like put on a cap. She put her hair in a cap and put it on and go walk around the casino. Poor my mom was such a difficult life. And so she would go to the casino and she would just walk around. And I'm sure she gambled a little bit, but it wasn't her thing really. But she would just need somewhere to go, and she'd just roam the casino all night so she didn't have to come home and like be around my dad and the world he'd created. And that went on for a good 7 or 8 years. And after that, she was getting older and she broke down at a certain point. And, her kids were like, my life was all screwed up because, the way my dad is, and he was doing what he did to her to me. But she couldn't look at it. She couldn't realize that her oldest son was going through the exact same thing. And there was no way out for him, just like there had been no way out for her. And she just kind of preferred blaming me for it, even though it's like exactly the same thing. And so my brother and sister, she just kind of like she needed them to be successful the way she needed me to be successful when I was younger. And so she just kind of like broke down and sacrificed her humanity. She just totally became my dad's like yes man, his broken bitch. And like for those 10 years when my little brother was growing up and like my sister was kind of half and half between me and my little brother, um she just she just did whatever my dad wanted. That was kind of it. And she was like she would fight my dad sometimes, but for herself. For me, she didn't want to realize that the exact same stuff was happening. So her self-destructive behavior was that she would just spend the night in the casino walking around like a lost soul, and then she'd go to Biloxi some days, so she'd have some alternative place to go. And then my version of this was like I would use when I got to around her age, maybe she did this when she was like 40, 45, 50ish. I started doing this in my late 20s is just to leave the house. I never wanted to go to a casino, but I just needed a place with Wi-Fi where I could hit, and maybe there'd be a cute girl or two that might walk by, and maybe I'll have to talk to him. And so that was like a coffee shop. And then it got to a point in New Orleans where I had been to every single coffee shop so often and had, interactions with baristas and people there so often that it became weird for me because New Orleans isn't a huge city. So there's like maybe 4 or 5 spots you can go, and each one has its trade-offs. And so there's places where I feel more comfortable going and places where it's not that comfortable. And then if you're trying to go early in the morning to like late at night, you can't be at the same place the whole day. So if you only have 6 or 7 options, you're showing up at two a day or three a day. Eventually, you can't sustain that. And then the New Orleans coffee shop scene was equally as sad as a casino. It's like maybe when I was in my high school years or my college years, it used to be a little bit upbeat, a little bit more hip. But by my late 20s, it was just like sad people on the verge of going homeless showing up to places like that mostly. Um, she also does this thing. I did the opposite of this, and that's how I maintained my selfhood and my sanity. It came to a point when she broke down. She surrounded herself with people who reinforced the slavery mindset, and she distanced herself from people like me or other friends of hers who might remind her who she was, where she came from, who she could be, what my father had done. She just completely cut off from those people and just like my dad's pre-approved list of brothers, sisters, friends that she could hang. That's who she was. And she was like my dad's broken bitch. And when she took on that identity, I guess my dad didn't have much to be hostile about, so they did get kind of affectionate, I guess, toward the end of their marriage. before she passed away, but she also passed away relatively young when she accepted, because that was the death of her soul, you know. So after the death of her soul, she was just like prone to whatever. Okay, so the last note is the manifestation of my self-destructive behavior in me took the shape of, okay, I'll just be honest about this. Marijuana smoking was one thing I used to do. I don't think it was that self-destructive. Um, when I used to get really, really angry or upset, or if my friends were going out drinking, I was going to drink because I was a good Muslim kid, and so I would just smoke a joint or something. I feel like it's not really that bad of a thing. I'm not gonna try to defend it or like advocate for it here, but that was definitely something I did. I think for someone like me who was like on a genius level of functioning, it definitely has. I don't know if it has effects on like an average level of functioning, but if you're like a creative genius and you have like genius cognition in certain areas, not in everything, but in certain things, it can definitely like it can definitely mess with that, especially if your genius has to do with language. I think it can definitely affect your language skills to some degree. um, I think there's a lot of factors in there, so it's not like an absolute thing, but my circumstances, my situation, I think it had some impact on me. Sitting on a computer for days doing research, so my pattern became like with my dad, every time he would break a context, it would be like, oh, we can't do this because of this reason. Like, I can't send you the money because it's unsafe to send over Western Union. You need to get a bank account. So I go to Cambodia and get a bank account. And now it's something else, you know? And so it's always the shifting target. Like, the rules are always changing, the goalposts are always moving. And so my way of responding to that as a cognitive person was like whatever new problem he would set up, I would go to work solving it, like through research and understanding and creating options and possibilities. And as soon as I would solve it, there would be a new one. And like that drove me crazy. And that amount of time, like it became a habit. So I would be like, in my early 20s, it would be healthy. I'd sit down for a couple hours, I'd exercise, I'd walk around, I'd do something else, I'll come back. But then it just trying to escape the cycle, it became part of the cycle. Spend like days at a time, just 12 hours done, like that, like for days. And it's still like that now. I've been at this location, this Airbnb for like 4 days, and no, like 2 weeks or 12 days or 13 days, and all 13 days have gone by like that because my time is filled with research, creating videos, writing notes, doing all sorts of stuff, and the time goes by really fast. So that's an overview of sociopathy and self-destructive behavior, um, how it can manifest and what it's like and stuff like that. Hope it was valuable and useful to you, and I will talk to you soon. Please like, please subscribe, and please tell your friends about this. Assalamu alaikum.